I was out of the forest, but I could feel that its spirit still followed me. The executioner's rifle was aimed at my grandparents' and great-great-grandfather's backs. So they came like servants from nations all over, and some nations even bowed to aid in the will of that embodiment of death. That man who was death, and they served because they loved death. In his name, my grandparents were marched with assault rifles to their backs. I could see them, but they could not see me. I watched as the soldiers led them, and I could see barbed wire in the direction in which they marched. And there were brick buildings guarded by soldiers. There were smokestacks and crematoria. And when I looked closely, there among the soldiers, I could see unarmed men and women. Even at that distance, it was clear that the unarmed men and women were kept tormented and low, that it was a place of extermination for both the prisoners and the jailers. There would be no men and no women left when the conflict was over, only shells of what was once formerly human. The whole world would be left broken. You could see the way they worshipped it and venerated it with their human blood and treasure. It was a terrible Ragnarok they had realized through a collective desire to watch the world burn. It was a circle. The beginning and the end were right next to each other. Loud engines roared in the factories of the warehouses where the prisoners were tortured, where slaves at gunpoint were expended for labor until they had no life left inside them. When the life inside them had been used up, they were forced to undress before being gassed to death, to death, to death. In the name of death, they would chant and parade, all hail death. They would scream with wild chants on fire marches and seated at death's round table. Inside his eagle's lair, in his lion's den, with his skull's head daggers, they would consecrate their blood and make a solemn pact to serve death, at penalty of death. Forever with their torches and burning books, they would be bound. Death's agents engulfed in their terrible Ragnarok and eternal recurrence. The flesh of their victims would be made ash. The prisoners exterminated would become free. They would become light. The torturers would become like a perpetual shade cast in a void of chaos. Watching the scene, I saw that Muller and Schmidt had Moses, Miriam, and Noah at the entrance to the compound. If I did not reunite with them, I would not be saved. They would not be saved. They would not be saved. I would always wear the yellow star, the ink of the identifying tattoo with the numbers of an IBM-designed tracking system would always lead them straight to me. Before birth, I had ridden like cattle on a train car. I had watched the sun and moon rise and fall with rain and clouds through barbed wire, and I had been pursued by dogs and bootmen even before flesh or name had been given to me. Because humans are vessels for inheritance. And I have been given a dark inheritance, just like the starling, who knows its place in the flying formation. I have been chosen and cast. My role as a survivor, my birthright. Destiny has manufactured me as an agent of light in the service of the great work and the ultimate geometer. And divine architect of existence has measured and fit the stage with the perfect players. I know that even the most evil of men, in the service of the most vile, do only as they're meant to, and as they can. So, we must learn to look at the most foul and see them as the fulfillment of some good that is yet to come. Because evil is the soil where just men sow their crop. Like the forces of a magnet acting against their opposition, there is no will, only pull. No matter how much anyone would like to believe that they are arbiters of their fate, the truth is that there is a conductor who orchestrates our movements and leads our symphonies. In that moment, I knew the only course of action was to reunite with my relatives. If I lost them, I might lose myself and remain forever inside the devastation that was thrust on them, even after they had escaped it. Every entrance was guarded by soldiers with rifles and bayonets, except for a field in the distance where the earth was red. It looked as if the ground was moving. But there, in the red field with the heaving earth, there were no soldiers. An abandoned shack stood next to the barbed wire of the camp on that side where no soldiers guarded. If I could get through the red field, I would be able to climb the abandoned shack and jump from it into the camp. That was the only choice. There was nothing else to do but to survive, to stay alive and avoid extermination in the name of preserving something good for those who would come after. It would be a natural drive fulfilled, because all living things sought to reproduce themselves, and because a living thing hunted, that survived, became an entirely different creature. My grandparents had altered the entire nature of our familial line by surviving. I was a creature designed for survival. There in my bones and blood, where death's men believed my inferiority could be identified, was the opposite. An eternal fire was burning inside me, with a flame that had been nurtured and tended over generations. It had been passed down to me, though I felt as though I possessed that thing that sustained me. I was only keeping it for the next bearer of the flame. There, where horror was ascendant, the wise and the foolish danced. Saints and martyrs emerged. Where the skin between divine and mortal broke, angels descended. I kept my mind there on shining things, as my eyes stayed on the red field and the shack. My feet carried me as though disconnected from the rest of my body. No fear or anxiety was present. Purpose and fate produced adrenaline and norepinephrine. When I got to my grandparents, there would be dopamine and serotonin. Oxytocin would flood my receptors from the presence of the ancestors. They would see that all of their sacrifices weren't for them alone. It would be clear that the memory of survival would exist in their line from that point on, thanks to their deeds. When I finally reached the red field, I could hear the grinding of engines and the humming of a large human mass. My focus was consumed with improvising a plan and manufacturing the best approach that I could to climb the old structure outside the barbed wire. There was hardly time to take in the mushing and squishing under my feet. It was a kind of strange red clay, and mounds of red earth were piled up randomly. The ground itself oozed a red muck, and the sap became a thick syrup that clung to my feet and made walking heavy. When I listened carefully under the engines, I could hear moaning. It was a strange sound, and the drive I felt was being drained. Tongues of snakes that were slithering, and my gut hissed and licked at my intestines. Sensation and electricity coursed in my fingertips. Beneath me, the mud of the red earth had become so viscous that my legs felt heavy. The gravity of the bog made it feel like walking on the moon. Wherever my feet went into the earth, the moaning seemed to groan out from underneath, as if every step I took physically wounded the mire. My focus had dissipated, dissolving into the smoke and fog. Terror shrieking in that dark room in the heart, where light does not reach, paralyzed me. Standing in one place only amplified the grunts. The groaning had gone from a barely audible whine to a wild shrieking like the screams of a patient having their legs amputated under no anesthetic. Something was grasping at my boot heel, clinging to my ankle like a drowning man. It was a human hand, terrified and shaking out of the dirt. The oozing was the blood of corpses, oversaturating the ground. Survivors of the firing squad still writhed in the earth, suffocating underneath the dead. The tears of the weeping grave were overflowing, and when I looked down, I could see that I was covered in their blood. Nausea gripped me, and dry heaving, I tried to stop myself from vomiting. I kicked at the hand reaching for me like a muscle spasm out of instinct and fear. Running forward to escape, I stumbled. Falling to the ground, I could smell flesh and decaying human fluid. Blood was seeping up like sewage in a gutter, while all around I could see more hands of survivors breaking through. Standing, I lost track of my direction. Dashing back and forth, I fell again and vomited. The stomach fluid and bile spewed out from my mouth onto a set of outstretched fingers. Frantically, I began to dig with my bare hands. Into the blood-muck earth, I cupped and cleaved. All around the limbs of the survivor I swung, throwing the dirt behind me until I could see a bleeding forehead and then nose and mouth, along with exposed arms clenched up. There was a face covered in blood and dirt, bleeding from a fatal wound that had not yet killed it. I could not even tell if it was a woman or a man. On the face was a twisted expression of horror, and the mouth wide open continued to plead in utter disbelief. There was nothing but the sound of agony, terror and pain, muffled by dirt. My presence excited the survival instincts of those who still lived, and though they had already accepted their death, they writhed and seized at even the slight chance of life. But there would be nothing I could do for them. When I had finally dug down deep enough that the wounded individual before me was free from the moaning grave, I carried them out and placed them down away from where I had taken them. It was clear that the wounds were fatal. Their eyes stared straight ahead as I went back to the pit I had plucked them from. In the dirt, beneath where the feet of the dying individual had been, there were two wild eyes reeling in silent dread. A scream tore through my mouth, and my hands covered my head as I rocked back and forth. Slowly I pulled myself away, shaking and weak. The weeping grave continued to bleed, the stifled cries of the slaughtered. Every step I took became like another betrayal. Even if I could not save anyone's life, no one should die like that without at least someone to give them comfort or stand witness. But they had each other. No one else would ever know what they had gone through, only the one beside them. I had to leave them behind. If I stayed, I would be caught and forced to join. There in that mass grave was where I belonged, though. What right did I have to live when life had been taken from these innocents? I wanted to throw myself down, to be shot, and buried there with my people, to be strangled by dirt, left suffocated and bleeding from an executioner's bullet, so that they could have company, and I could have relief from the guilt of living, when my betters had been exterminated. Then I saw it. In front of the shack that the weeping grave led to was a pile of pristine prisoners' outfits stacked on top of each other and folded neatly. Besides the striped shirts and trousers were a pile of precisely placed shoes. Slowly I did as they had in their last moments. Taking off my jacket, I began unbuttoning my shirt before placing it neatly folded in front of the other clothes. When I got to my shoes, I untied them and tugged them off my feet. With my pants, I repeated the same process. Once my clothes had been removed, I started dressing myself in the prisoner's uniform. Grabbing pants from the pile, I tried to find a pair that would fit me. When I had gone through a few pairs, I found one pair that seemed like it would fit and pulled them on. Afterwards, I repeated the ritual, but with the shirts, dressed in the clothes of the prisoners that lay dying and dead in the earth beside me. I hardened my heart. Dashing forward, I jumped and grabbed at the wood shingles of the shack to pull myself up onto the side of the building. When I was on the roof, I could see the shack was high enough that I could jump over the barbed wire. But if I didn't leap far enough, I would end up landing directly onto the fence. Not only was the fence razor sharp, but an electrified current strong enough to kill an elephant ran through it. Stepping back to the edge, I ran and jumped. Gliding through the air, I felt myself being carried. Closer and closer to the razor wire I got, until I could see I was over and past it. The crash of my legs as they gave out was the last sound I heard before landing and losing consciousness.